my own son Michael, and his wife Tiffany, the two people for whom I had willingly, lovingly become the unpaid, unthanked, and apparently unappreciated fulcrum of their entire domestic enterprise. Dead weight. The words, uttered by Tiffany, in a moment of careless cruelty, Michael standing by, with that familiar spineless acquiescence he'd perfected over the years, had landed not like a feather, but like a lead sinker, dragging my heart down into a place of cold, desolate clarity. For 5 years, since little Lily was born, followed swiftly by Tom, I had been their live-in nanny, their cook, their laundress, the steady, reliable engine that kept their two-career household chugging along smoothly while they climbed their respective corporate ladders, their eyes fixed on promotions and bonuses, their ears deaf to the quiet, steady beat of my aging heart, the one that was slowly, inexorably breaking under the strain of their relentless demands and their equally relentless ingratitude. They thought my silence, my weary nods, my increasingly forced smiles were signs of my contentment, my acceptance of my role as the domestic ghost in their upwardly mobile machine. They mistook my endurance for an endless well of maternal servitude. They didn't realize that even a well as deep as a grandmother's love can eventually run dry, especially when it's being siphoned off with such callous disregard. So I gave them their kids back, and in doing so, I took back my life, my dignity, my sanity. This is the story of how being called dead weight became the unexpected, liberating catalyst for me to finally, blessedly, cut the anchor and float free. Now let me tell you what really happened, how the tapestry of my golden years, which I had envisioned filled with quiet hobbies and gentle companionship, unraveled into a frantic, exhausting marathon of childcare and thankless servitude, and how one careless, cruel phrase finally gave me the permission I hadn't realized I so desperately needed to reclaim myself. It hadn't started as a burden. Oh no, far from it. When Michael and Tiffany first announced they were expecting Lily, my heart had swelled with a joy so pure, so potent it felt like a second spring. My own dear George, my husband, had passed away a few years prior, and the silence in our little house, the one we'd filled with laughter and love for over 40 years, had become almost unbearable at times. The thought of a grandchild, a new life, a continuation of our family, was a beacon of light in the encroaching shadows of my solitude. I'd knitted tiny booties, sewn delicate receiving blankets, my fingers, though a little stiffer than they once were, moving with a renewed sense of purpose. When Lily was born, I was there, of course, a constant, comforting presence in those first chaotic weeks. Tiffany, overwhelmed and tearful, had clung to me, grateful for my experience, my steady hands, my endless patience. "Oh, Eleanor," she'd sighed, her voice thick with exhaustion, "I don't know what we'd do without you." Those words at the time had felt like the sweetest music. I was needed. I was valued. I was, once again, an integral part of a family. When Tiffany's maternity leave ended, the arrangement seemed to evolve naturally. She and Michael were both on fast-track careers, their hours long, their commutes brutal. The cost of childcare in their trendy, up-and-coming neighborhood was, as Tiffany frequently lamented, astronomical. "Mom," Michael had said one evening, his arm around Tiffany's shoulders, their faces a study in earnest appeal, "we were wondering just for a little while, until things settle down, if you might consider helping us out with Lily. It would mean the world to us, and she adores you." How could I refuse? My days were my own. My small pension, combined with George's, was enough for my modest needs, and the thought of spending my days with my precious granddaughter, of watching her grow, of being an active part of her life, was an irresistible lure. So I agreed. "Just for a little while," I'd echoed, a small, hopeful smile on my face. That little while stretched into a year, then 2. Lily was a delight, a bright, curious child who filled my days with laughter and wonder. I'd take her to the park, to baby music classes, to the library for story time. I'd cook nutritious meals, ensure her naps were sacrosanct, her evenings filled with quiet play and gentle lullabies. Michael and Tiffany would return late, exhausted but grateful, their brief interactions with Lily often limited to a hurried goodnight kiss before they collapsed onto the sofa, their attention quickly turning to their laptops, their work emails, the endless demands of their ambitious lives. I rarely stayed over. preferring the quiet familiarity of my own small home, a 20-minute drive away. But my days became entirely consumed by their needs, their schedule, my own hobbies, my gardening, my book club, my weekly bridge game with Mildred and the girls were gradually, almost imperceptibly, pushed to the sidelines. There was always a reason. Lily was teething. Tiffany had an early meeting. Michael was traveling for work. My life became a supporting role in their grand production. Then Tom arrived, a boisterous, demanding bundle of energy, just 18 months after Lily. The little while I had signed up for now had an indefinite extension, an unspoken assumption that Grandma Eleanor would of course manage, and manage I did. My small house was effectively mothballed, my visits there becoming fleeting. Hurried affairs to collect mail and water my increasingly neglected plants. I moved, unofficially, into their spare room, a small, characterless space at the back of their sprawling modern house, a room that felt more like a servant's quarters than a welcome guest's. The demands escalated. It was no longer just childcare, it was grocery shopping, laundry, light housekeeping, just to help us keep on top of things. "Mom, you're such a lifesaver," Tiffany would chirp, before handing me a lengthy to-do list and rushing off to her Pilates class or her networking brunch. Michael, when he was home, which was increasingly rare, would offer a perfunctory "thanks, Mom, couldn't do it without you," before retreating to his home office, the door firmly closed against the joyful but undeniably demanding chaos of his own children's lives. My days became a blur of feedings, nappy changes, school runs for Lily, toddler tantrums from Tom, endless loads of washing, meals cooked and often eaten alone after the children were in bed, and Michael and Tiffany were either working late or out at some important client dinner. My own life, my own needs, my own desires seemed to vanish, subsumed entirely by the relentless, all-consuming machinery of their family. My friends, Mildred in particular, voiced their concerns. "Eleanor, dear," Mildred had said, her voice laced with a worried frown, during one of our increasingly rare phone calls, "you look exhausted. Are they appreciating you? Are they giving you any time for yourself?" I'd waved away her concerns, offering a weak, "Oh, it's fine, Mildred, they're just so busy. And the children, they need me." But did they need me, Eleanor, the woman, the individual? Or did they just need a functionary, a reliable unpaid caregiver, a domestic appliance that never broke down, never complained, never asked for anything in return? The truth, when I dared to let it surface in the quiet, lonely hours after the children were asleep and the house was finally still, was a bitter, uncomfortable thing. I was tired, bone tired. My old aches and pains, the ones George used to gently massage away, were a constant, throbbing reminder of my advancing years, of the physical toll this relentless routine was taking. My garden, once my pride and joy, was now a riot of weeds, the roses untended, their blooms fading, unmourned. My books lay unread, my knitting needles gathering dust. My own life, it seemed, had been put on indefinite hold, sacrificed at the altar of my children's ambition and my grandchildren's needs. And the thanks, the appreciation, it had dwindled from grateful sighs to perfunctory nods, to an almost complete, oblivious, taking for granted of my constant, unwavering presence. I was part of the furniture, the invisible, silent infrastructure that allowed their glossy, successful lives to function so seamlessly. The deadweight comment, when it finally came, was not, in retrospect, a sudden, unprovoked attack. It was the inevitable, toxic bloom of a plant whose roots had been nurtured for years in the fertile soil of their casual entitlement, and my own silent, uncomplaining acquiescence. It happened on a Saturday. Michael and Tiffany were planning a last-minute weekend getaway, a much-needed couples retreat, as Tiffany had announced, her voice already an octave higher, with anticipatory pleasure. I was of course expected to look after Lily and Tom, not asked, expected. I had, however, tentatively, apologetically, mentioned that it was Mildred's 80th birthday that Sunday, a milestone I had promised, months ago, I would not miss. "Oh, Mom," Tiffany had sighed, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows arching in a moue of an opia exasperation. "Really? Can't Mildred celebrate her 80th another day? This is important for us, for our marriage." "Mildred is my oldest friend, Tiffany," I'd said, my voice quiet but firm, "and an 80th birthday is rather a fixed event." That's when she'd said it. Not to me directly, of course. That would have required a level of courage, or perhaps just basic human decency, she clearly didn't possess. She turned to Michael, who was idly scrolling through his phone, seemingly oblivious to our conversation, and said, in a stage whisper loud enough for me, and probably the entire neighborhood, to hear, "Honestly, Michael, sometimes your mother is just dead weight. Always an issue, always some inconvenient prior commitment. You'd think she'd be grateful for a roof over her head and a purpose in her old age. Dead weight." The words hung in the air, ugly, irrefutable. I saw Michael flinch, a flicker of something, shame, discomfort, in his eyes before he quickly composed his features into a mask of bland neutrality. He didn't defend me. He didn't protest. He just continued to scroll through his phone, a silent, damning endorsement of his wife's casual, brutal assessment. In that moment, something inside me, something I hadn't even realized was still alive, simply snapped. The years of quiet endurance, of swallowed resentments, of unacknowledged sacrifices coalesced into a single searing point of pain, and then into a cold, hard, diamond-bright clarity. Dead weight. Very well. If that's what I was, then it was time for this particular piece of dead weight to unburden them of its presence. Permanently. The rest of that Saturday passed in a blur of carefully concealed turmoil. Outwardly, I maintained a facade of calm, going about my usual routine with Lily and Tom, bathing them, reading them stories, tucking them into their beds with kisses and whispered reassurances that Grandma loved them very, very much. But inwardly, my mind was a maelstrom, Tiffany's cruel words echoing like a relentless, discordant drumbeat. Dead weight. Each syllable was a fresh stab, a confirmation of a truth I had perhaps long suspected, but had refused to acknowledge. In their eyes, I was no longer Eleanor, mother, grandmother, a woman with her own history, her own worth. I was a function, an unpaid utility, and apparently an increasingly inconvenient one. Michael and Tiffany left for their much-needed couples retreat early that evening, their farewells to me perfunctory, their instructions for the children delivered with their usual air of casual assumption. "Don't let Tom have too much sugar before bed, Mom," Tiffany had called over her shoulder as she swept out the door, her designer luggage bumping carelessly against the hallway wall. "And Lily needs to practice her reading." Page 27. No mention of Mildred's birthday. No acknowledgement of my feelings. Just instructions, as if I were a particularly slow, but hopefully reliable domestic robot. That night, after the children were asleep, I didn't retreat to my small, characterless spare room. Instead, I sat in the darkened living room, their living room, the one they had so effortlessly, so completely made their own. I sat in the expensive, uncomfortable sofa they had chosen, a sofa that offered no solace, no familiarity, and I thought about my life, about George, about the dreams we had shared, the home we had built. I thought about Michael, the bright, eager boy he had once been, before ambition and Tiffany had reshaped him into this stranger. I thought about Lily and Tom, innocent pawns in their parents' self-absorbed game, children I loved with a fierceness that ached in my chest. And I thought about myself, Eleanor, a woman of 72 years, with a still sharp mind, a still loving heart, and I realized with a dawning surprising clarity, a still unbroken spirit. Dead weight? No, I was not dead weight. I was an anchor, perhaps, an anchor they had mistaken for a burden, an anchor they were about to discover they couldn't navigate without. The decision, when it came, was not born of anger, not entirely. It was born of a profound, weary sadness, and an even more profound, newly awakened sense of self-respect. I could not continue like this. I would not. My love for my grandchildren was a powerful, undeniable force. But my love for myself, the self I had so long neglected, so long suppressed, was finally, tentatively, beginning to reassert itself. I would not abandon Lily and Tom, but I would no longer allow myself to be exploited, to be disrespected, to be dismissed as dead weight by their thoughtless, entitled parents. The plan that began to form in my mind was simple, yet audacious. It involved no lawyers, no dramatic confrontations, no rewriting of wills, at least not yet. It involved a quiet, decisive, and utterly unexpected act of reclaiming my own life. The first step was to call Mildred, not to complain, not to seek sympathy, but to confirm my attendance at her 80th birthday celebration the following day. "Mildred, dear," I said, my voice surprisingly steady when she answered. "I wouldn't miss it for the world. Expect me around too, and yes, I'll bring my famous lemon drizzle cake." There was a surprised silence on the other end, then Mildred's warm, knowing chuckle. "Eleanor Periwinkle," she said, you sound like you finally decided to set the world to rights. It's about bloody time." That night, I slept more soundly than I had in years. The decision was made, the anchor was about to be lifted, and I, Eleanor, was about to set sail on a new, uncharted, and blessedly independent course. The temporary arrangement was about to become very, very permanent, but not in the way Amelia, or Michael, or Tiffany had ever envisioned. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect autumn day. I rose early, a strange sense of calm, of purpose, suffusing my being. Lily and Tom, still sleepy-eyed, padded into the kitchen, their small faces alight with the innocent expectation of a weekend morning with Grandma. I made them pancakes, their favorite, with extra blueberries, for Lily and a dusting of powdered sugar for Tom. We read stories, built a magnificent Lego castle in the living room, their happy chatter a bittersweet counterpoint to the decision that had solidified in my heart. Around noon, I began to pack, not a suitcase for a weekend getaway, but a few sturdy cardboard boxes I'd found in the garage. I packed my clothes, the few toiletries I kept at their house, my knitting, the dog-eared copy of Pride and Prejudice that was my constant companion. I packed the small framed photograph of George, the one that had sat, largely unnoticed, on the bedside table in my characterless spare room. The children watched, their expressions puzzled. "Are you going on a trip, Grandma?" Lily asked, her brow furrowed. "Sort of, darling," I said, my voice gentle. "Grandma is going home, to her own little house." Tom's lower lip began to tremble. But who will make us pancakes?" "Your mommy and daddy will make you pancakes, sweet boy," I said, stroking his soft hair. "They're very clever, you know. They can learn." The packing didn't take long. I had accumulated so little in their sprawling, impersonal house. My life, it seemed, had been condensed into these few, easily transportable boxes. At 1:30, just as I was taping up the last box, the doorbell rang. It was Mildred, looking magnificent in a purple dress and a rather flamboyant feathered hat, a bottle of champagne tucked under her arm. "Ready for the birthday girl's grand entrance, Eleanor?" she boomed, her eyes twinkling. "Or rather, your grand exit." Lily and Tom, initially shy, were soon captivated by Mildred's booming laugh and her endless supply of rather terrible jokes. While Mildred entertained the children, I made a final sweep of the spare room, ensuring I'd left nothing behind. Nothing of myself, anyway. My presence there, I realized, had always been a spectral one, a ghost of maternal obligation. Then I sat down at their gleaming minimalist kitchen island and wrote a note, not a long recriminatory epistle, but a short, simple, to-the-point message. "Dear Michael and Tiffany," it began, "thank you for your hospitality these past 5 years. As you know, I have always endeavored to be of assistance to you and the children. However, your recent assessment of my contribution to your household as dead weight has given me considerable pause for thought. I have concluded that it is perhaps time for this particular piece of dead weight to unburden you of its presence. Accordingly, I have returned to my own home. Lily and Tom are of course your children, and their ongoing care and upbringing are, and always have been, your responsibility. I trust you will manage. I have packed my few belongings. I wish you both well. Sincerely, Eleanor Periwinkle, your mother, the dead weight." I propped the note against the ridiculously expensive Italian coffee machine they'd recently acquired, a machine I had never been entirely sure how to operate. Then, with Mildred's help, we loaded my boxes into her surprisingly spacious hatchback. Lily and Tom, their faces now etched with a dawning, tearful understanding that Grandma was really truly leaving, clung to my legs, their small hands gripping my skirt. "Don't go, Grandma," Lily wailed, her face buried in my side. "Please don't go." Tom, usually so boisterous, was silent, his eyes wide, his lower lip trembling uncontrollably. My heart, oh my heart, it felt as if it were being torn in two. This was the hardest part, the part I had dreaded, the part that made me question, for a fleeting, agonizing moment, the rightness of my decision. I knelt down, gathering them both into a fierce, desperate hug. "Oh, my darlings," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears, "Grandma loves you more than words can say. And I'm not disappearing. My little house isn't so far away. We'll see each other. We'll have adventures. But Grandma needs to be in her own home now, just like you need to be with your mommy and daddy." I kissed their tear-streaked faces, my own tears finally, betrayingly, beginning to fall. Then, with a strength I didn't know I possessed, I gently disengaged their clinging hands, stood up and walked out the door, Mildred's comforting arm around my shoulders. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The sound of their small, heartbroken sobs followed me all the way to the car, a sound that would echo in my heart for a long, long time. But as Mildred pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the sprawling modern house that had been my gilded cage for 5 long years, a strange, unexpected sense of lightness, of liberation, began to bubble up within me. The anchor had been lifted, and I, Eleanor Periwinkle, was finally, blessedly free.
The drive to
The
Mildred's
dead
birthday
weight,
party.
it turned out,
And
had
then,
wings.
Later that evening, to my own dear, neglected little bungalow, was a blur of conflicting emotions. The raw, visceral pain of leaving Lily and Tom, the image of their tear-streaked faces seared into my memory, warred with a burgeoning, almost giddy sense of relief. Mildred, bless her intuitive soul, chattered away about inconsequential things, the outrageous price of petrol, the scandalous behavior of the vicar's cat, her plans for a new rose garden, her cheerful monologue, a comforting buffer against the turmoil in my own heart. Mildred's party was a lively, joyful affair, filled with old friends, laughter, and a surprising amount of rather potent homemade elderflower wine. For a few precious hours, I allowed myself to be swept away by the warmth, the camaraderie, the simple, uncomplicated pleasure of being in the company of people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. I even, to my own astonishment, found myself laughing, a real, genuine laugh, the kind that hadn't reached my eyes in years. But as the party wound down, as the last of the guests departed, a new anxiety began to creep in. The thought of returning to my bungalow, alone after so long, was daunting. Would it feel empty? Would the silence be a comfort or a crushing reminder of my solitude? Mildred, sensing my unease, insisted on accompanying me. "Nonsense, Eleanor," she'd said, when I tried to protest. "Every grand dame needs a lady in waiting for her triumphal return. Besides," she'd added, her eyes twinkling, "I want to see the look on your face when you realize you can finally leave your teacup on the coffee table without someone tutting about water rings." My little house, when we finally arrived, was much as I had left it, though dustier, colder, and imbued with a faint, melancholy scent of disuse. But as I stepped over the threshold, a profound sense of homecoming, of rightness, washed over me. This was my space, my sanctuary. Every chipped teacup, every faded photograph, every worn armchair was a testament to a life lived, a love shared, a history that was mine, and mine alone. Mildred, practical as ever, bustled about, opening windows to air out the rooms, putting the kettle on, her cheerful presence banishing the last of the lingering shadows. We sat in my familiar, comfortable kitchen, sipping tea, my boxes piled haphazardly in the hallway, a tangible symbol of my reclaimed independence. "Well, Eleanor," Mildred said, raising her teacup in a mock toast, "welcome home to the next chapter." The next chapter. It felt strange, exhilarating, terrifying. For 5 years, my life had been dictated by the needs of others, my days structured around Lily and Tom's routines, my own desires relegated to the distant, dusty corners of my mind. Now, suddenly, my time was my own, my space was my own, my life was my own. The silence, when Mildred finally departed late that evening, was profound. But it was not the oppressive, lonely silence of my characterless spare room at Michael and Tiffany's. It was a different kind of silence. A peaceful silence. A silence filled with possibility. I slept in my own bed that night, George's side of the mattress cool and empty beside me, but strangely comforting nonetheless. I woke the next morning to the sound of birdsong from my own overgrown garden, the scent of my own familiar lavender-scented sheets. I made myself a pot of tea, using my favorite chipped china mug, and sat on my small sun-drenched porch, a book open in my lap, though I found myself simply staring out at the unruly beauty of my neglected roses, their resilience a quiet echo of my own. The phone call from Michael came later that morning, just as I was contemplating an attack on the jungle that had once been my vegetable patch. His voice was tight, strained, a mixture of anger, disbelief, and a dawning panicked understanding. "Mom," he began, without preamble, "what the hell is going on? We came home last night, and you were gone. The kids, they're devastated. And this note, dead weight? Are you serious?" "Perfectly serious, Michael," I replied, my voice surprisingly calm. "I have returned to my own home, as is my right. But, the children, you can't just abandon them. Tiffany and I, we have jobs. Commitments. We rely on you. Indeed you do, Michael, I said. Or rather, you did. You relied on me to be your unpaid nanny, cook and housekeeper. You relied on me to sacrifice my own life, my own needs, for your convenience, and in return, your wife, with your tacit approval, deemed me dead weight. Well, this particular piece of dead weight has decided to lighten your load, permanently. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then, Mom, you're being unreasonable, irrational. This isn't like you. Oh, I think this is exactly like me, Michael, I said, a small unfamiliar smile playing on my lips. The me I had almost forgotten existed. The me who values her own worth, her own dignity. The children, as I said in my note, are your responsibility. I trust you and Tiffany, with your 2 impressive careers and your astronomical childcare costs, will find a way to manage. Now, if you'll excuse me, my roses are in desperate need of attention. Goodbye, Michael. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling slightly, but my heart, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, felt strangely, wonderfully, light. The dead weight had indeed taken flight. And the view from up here, I had to admit, was rather spectacular. The fallout from my grand departure was, as expected, immediate and rather dramatic, though I experienced most of it secondhand through Mildred's gleeful, if slightly embellished reports. Apparently, Michael and Tiffany's carefully constructed world, so reliant on my invisible, unpaid labor, had begun to unravel with astonishing speed. Tiffany had to cancel her spa day and her power lunch with that dreadful woman from marketing. Mildred cackled over the phone, all because little Tom had a meltdown at nursery, and there was no dead weight to collect him. Michael, it seemed, had been forced to take several days off work, his important meetings and critical deadlines, taking a back seat to the far more pressing realities of sick children, school lunches, and the relentless, soul-crushing drudgery of laundry. Their sleek, minimalist house, once a pristine temple to their sophisticated taste, was, according to Mildred's sources, namely, Mrs. Henderson from their neighborhood, who had, it turned out, a direct line to Tiffany's increasingly frazzled cleaning lady, rapidly descending into a state of chaotic disarray. Toys littered the expensive Italian floor tiles, unwashed dishes piled up in the state-of-the-art sink, and the scent of stale coffee and parental desperation, apparently, now permeated the air. They attempted, of course, to guilt-trip me. There were tearful phone calls from Michael, lamenting the children's distress, their confusion, their constant questions about when Grandma was coming back. "Lily cries herself to sleep every night, Mom," he'd said, his voice thick with a manufactured sorrow. "She misses you terribly. Don't you care?" "Of course I care, Michael," I'd replied, my voice gentle but firm. "I love Lily and Tom more than words can say, and I miss them too. But their emotional well-being, like their physical care, is your responsibility, not mine. Perhaps if you and Tiffany spent a little less time at your important meetings, and a little more time actually being present with your children, they might feel less abandoned." Tiffany's approach was less subtle, more overtly aggressive. She sent a barrage of text messages, alternating between saccharine appeals to my maternal instincts and thinly veiled accusations of selfishness and cruelty. "Eleanor," one particularly memorable message read, "I simply cannot comprehend how you can be so callous. These are your grandchildren. They need you. We need you. Is this how you want to spend your final years? Alone and bitter, having alienated your entire family?" I didn't respond to her texts. There was no point. Her words were not born of genuine concern, but of a desperate self-serving panic. She wasn't worried about me, or even, really, about the children. She was worried about herself, about the inconvenience, the expense, the sheer unadulterated disruption my absence was causing to her. Carefully curated, effortlessly managed by me life, my own life, in contrast, was slowly, beautifully beginning to blossom. My little bungalow, once so neglected, was gradually returning to its former cozy charm. I attacked the overgrown garden with a vengeance, my hands, though stiff, remembering the familiar rhythms of pruning, weeding, planting. The roses under my renewed care began to unfurl new, vibrant blooms. My books, my knitting, my quiet companionship with Mildred and the girls from my bridge club, these simple, unassuming pleasures, so long suppressed, now filled my days with a gentle, unassuming joy. I even, to my own surprise, started painting again, a hobby I'd abandoned decades ago, when the demands of motherhood and marriage had consumed all my creative energy. My small canvases, filled with impressionistic renderings of my garden, of the familiar landscapes of my neighborhood, were perhaps not masterpieces, but they were mine. They were a tangible expression of a self I was slowly, joyfully, rediscovering. The question of Lily and Tom, however, remained a persistent ache in my heart. I missed their laughter, their sticky hugs, the chaotic, joyful energy they brought into a room. I worried about them, about how their parents' selfishness, their emotional immaturity, might be impacting their small, vulnerable souls. One afternoon, about a month after my departure, Lily herself called me. Her small, hesitant voice on the other end of the line was like a balm to my bruised heart. "Grandma," she'd whispered, "it's Lily. I miss you." "Oh, my darling Lily," I'd said, my voice thick with emotion. "I miss you too, more than words can say." We talked for a long time that afternoon, not about Michael or Tiffany, not about the reasons for my leaving, but about things, about her new kitten, about the wobbly tooth she was so proud of, about the storybook we'd been reading together before I left. It was a small, fragile connection, a tentative bridge across the chasm of adult folly, and it gave me hope. Hope that my love for my grandchildren, and theirs for me, might yet find a way to transcend the selfishness, the thoughtlessness, of their parents. Hope that one day, perhaps, we might find a new way to be a family, a way built not on obligation or exploitation, but on genuine affection, mutual respect, and a hard-won understanding of what truly, deeply, matters. The calls from Lily, and occasionally from Tom, who was less articulate, but equally enthusiastic in his declarations of, "I miss you, Guama," became a regular if bittersweet feature of my new life. They'd call from Tiffany's phone, usually when she was otherwise occupied, their whispered conversations a clandestine link to a world I had left behind, but a world that still held a significant piece of my heart. I learned, through their innocent, unfiltered narratives, about the ongoing chaos in their parents' lives, about the succession of stressed, short-tempered nannies who never stayed long, about the burnt dinners and the forgotten school permission slips, about the hushed, angry arguments between Michael and Tiffany that often sent them scurrying to their rooms. It pained me to hear it, to know that these two precious children were caught in the crossfire of their parents' selfishness and immaturity. But I also knew, with a certainty that was both sad and liberating, that it was not my responsibility to fix it. I had tried, for 5 long years, to be the glue that held their family together, the silent, uncomplaining shock absorber for their dysfunctional dynamics. And what had it gotten me? A label, dead weight. No. My role now was different. My role was to be a grandmother, not a surrogate parent, not a domestic servant, a grandmother who loved them fiercely, who would always be there for them, but who would no longer sacrifice her own well-being, her own dignity, on the altar of their parents' convenience. I started inviting Lily and Tom to spend Saturday afternoons with me at my bungalow. Michael and Tiffany, to my surprise, agreed, their acquiescence likely born more of desperation for a few hours of child-free respite than any genuine desire for me to reconnect with the children. But I didn't care about their motives. All that mattered was those precious fleeting hours with my grandchildren. Our Saturdays became a sacred ritual. We'd bake cookies in my sunny kitchen, the air filled with the scent of cinnamon and vanilla, their small hands dusted with flour, their laughter echoing through the house like a long-forgotten song. We'd work in the garden, planting seeds, watering flowers, their faces alight with the wonder of watching things grow. We'd read stories, build magnificent Lego castles, have tea parties on the porch with my chipped china teacups and an assortment of rather motley-looking stuffed animals as our esteemed guests. These were simple, unassuming pleasures, but they were imbued with a magic, a joy, that had been so conspicuously absent from my life for so long, and in these moments I was not dead weight. I was Grandma, beloved, cherished, and I dared to hope, a little bit, magical. Michael and Tiffany rarely accompanied the children on these visits. They'd drop them off at the curb, a hurried wave, a perfunctory "be good for Grandma," and then they'd be gone, off to their important weekend pursuits. Their absence was, frankly, a relief. It allowed me to connect with Lily and Tom on my own terms, to create a space of warmth, of unconditional love, untainted by the underlying tensions, the unspoken resentments, that always seemed to simmer just beneath the surface when their parents were around. Occasionally, however, one of them would be forced, by circumstance or a rare flicker of parental guilt, to stay for a few minutes at pickup time. These encounters were always awkward, stilted. Tiffany would hover in the doorway, her eyes flicking around my small, comfortable living room with that familiar appraising gaze, as if still assessing its deficiencies, its lack of modern aesthetic. Michael would fidget, avoiding my eye, his conversation limited to monosyllabic responses and anxious glances at his watch. They never apologized. They never acknowledged the hurt they had caused, the cruelty of their words. It was as if the dead weight incident, my subsequent departure, had been a mere blip, an inconvenient interruption in their otherwise perfect lives, an interruption they were now eager to smooth over, to forget. But I had not forgotten, and I would not allow them to. My politeness towards them was unwavering, a carefully constructed wall of civility that offered no purchase for their guilt-tripping or their attempts at emotional manipulation. I was Grandma Eleanor, the beloved caregiver of their children on Saturday afternoons, but I was no longer Eleanor, the exploitable, dismissible domestic servant. That Eleanor was gone, and she was not coming back. My legacy, I was beginning to realize, was not just in the legal documents Mr. Abernathy had so carefully drafted. It was here, in these precious fleeting moments with Lily and Tom. It was in the scent of freshly baked cookies, in the shared laughter over a silly story, in the warmth of a small hand tucked trustingly in mine. It was in the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I was loved, not for what I could do for them, but for who I was. And that, I knew, was an inheritance far more valuable, far more enduring, than any amount of money or property. The dead weight had not just found its wings, it had found its heart again. The rhythm of our Saturday afternoons continued, a steady, comforting beat in the often chaotic symphony of our fractured family. Lily and Tom thrived in the atmosphere of unconditional love and unhurried attention I provided. Lily, once a shy, reserved little girl, blossomed into a confident, articulate chatterbox, her imagination taking flight as we invented elaborate stories about the squirrels in my garden or the pictures in her favorite books. Tom, his boisterous energy channeled into constructive play, became a surprisingly adept Lego architect, his creations growing more ambitious, more fantastical, with each passing week. They started calling my bungalow Grandma's Happy House, a name that brought a lump to my throat every time I heard it. It was, indeed, a happy house again, its silence no longer one of loneliness, but of peaceful contentment, punctuated by the joyful sounds of children's laughter, sounds I had thought I might never hear within its walls again. Michael and Tiffany, meanwhile, seemed to be navigating their own, considerably less happy reality. The succession of nannies continued, each one lasting a little less time than the one before. The stress of juggling their demanding careers with the equally demanding realities of hands-on parenting was clearly taking its toll. Their appearances at drop-off and pick-up times became increasingly harried, their faces etched with a familiar exhaustion I recognized all too well, the exhaustion of a life out of balance, of priorities skewed, of choices made for all the wrong reasons. One blustery November afternoon, as Tiffany was collecting the children, looking particularly frayed around the edges, she paused at my doorway, an unusual hesitancy in her demeanor. "Eleanor," she began, her voice low, almost apologetic, "I was wondering, next Saturday Michael and I have this unavoidable work function. It's an evening thing, a dinner, terribly important for Michael's career, and our current nanny, well, she's quit, rather abruptly. I know it's a lot to ask, but would you by any chance be willing to have the children overnight?" The request hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. An overnight stay. It was a significant escalation from our usual Saturday afternoon arrangement. A part of me, the old accommodating Eleanor, felt an instinctive urge to say yes, to smooth things over, to be helpful. But another, newer, stronger part, the Eleanor who had been called dead weight and had subsequently found her wings, hesitated. "I see," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "And what, precisely, would this unavoidable work function entail for you and Michael?" Tiffany's eyes flickered. "Oh, you know," she said, a little too vaguely, "networking, schmoozing, the usual corporate drudgery. But it's crucial for Michael's visibility in the company." "Crucial," I echoed, "more crucial perhaps than spending a Saturday evening with your own children." Her face flushed. "That's not fair, Eleanor. We work hard. We're trying to build a future for them." "A future built on what, Tiffany?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. "On ambition? On material success? Or on love, connection, presence? The kind of things that can't be bought, or delegated, or outsourced to an endless succession of nannies. or even to a willing but no longer exploitable grandmother. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, a flicker of something, anger, shame, understanding, in her eyes. I don't know what you mean, she stammered. I think you do, Tiffany, I said gently. I think deep down, you know exactly what I mean. I paused, then continued, as for next Saturday, I'm afraid I have plans. Mildred and I are attending a concert at the community hall, a rather charming string quartet. We've had the tickets for weeks. It wasn't entirely true. Mildred and I had discussed the concert, but hadn't yet committed. But in that moment, the decision made itself. My time, my life, was my own, and it would no longer be available at their beck and call, a convenient stopgap for their self-inflicted scheduling crises. Tiffany's face fell. Oh, she said, her voice small, deflated. Right, of course. Well, we'll figure something out. She herded the children, who had been listening with wide, uncomprehending eyes, towards the car, her usual brisk efficiency noticeably absent. As they drove away, I felt not triumph, but a quiet, profound sadness, not for myself but for them, for Michael and Tiffany, so lost in their pursuit of a hollow, superficial success that they were missing out on the true, irreplaceable treasures of their children's fleeting, precious childhood. And for Lily and Tom, two innocent little souls deserving of so much more than the distracted, outsourced parenting they were currently receiving. My legacy, I knew, would not be one of bitterness or revenge. It would be one of quiet strength, of self-respect, of a love that was unconditional, but not unconditional servitude. And perhaps, just perhaps, it would also be a silent, enduring lesson for Michael and Tiffany, a lesson about the true meaning of value, of worth, of the immeasurable, irreplaceable weight of a grandmother's love, a love they had so carelessly, so cruelly dismissed as nothing.